Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 18. Make sure you like and follow wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander. A reminder, we do this twice a week. On Tuesdays, we recap the week that was, and on Fridays, it's the Picks Pod. Now, hopefully you listened to last week's pod. As the upset pick of the week, the Saints hit as outright underdog winners, but also hit on the Patriots and Panthers doing the exact same thing. Not bad at all, as also, maybe for me, the biggest thing was Matt telling us both New York teams would have a chance to win, and they were both going to cover double-digit spreads. Hey, basically, if you're not listening to the pod, I don't know what you're doing. But if you didn't listen to us here, hopefully you checked out the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter, which had yet another winning week. Make that 8 straight weeks in a row of just winners. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for free at drf.com/sports to receive 2 weekly newsletters delivered to your email inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles that you don't want to miss. Again, drf.com/sports for all of the insight and analysis you need each and every day. Plus, of course, we go in depth on this podcast, including some NBA action. And you know what? We did this last Tuesday, so why not try it again? I'm going to give you 3 of my NBA best bets for Tuesday. A reminder, obviously recording this early on Tuesday morning. So if you want to keep up to date with all of the line movements, make sure you head to drf.com, as the lines might change depending on who's in or out of the lineups. But as long as all of the stars are in play, these are my picks. First off, I like the Bucks in Detroit laying 5.5 points. The way that Bucks train is moving when they're on and when they're cooking, you can't stop that train. 5.5 points is, I'm okay to lay that even on the road against the Pistons. Sticking with another road team here, as I like the Miami Heat on the road, laying 2.5 points in Dallas against the Mavs. The Miami Heat so far are just off to a really good start, and I just like where their head's at. I think they have enough bodies to throw at Luka. And we're going to close out here with the Lakers minus 10.5, hosting the Houston Rockets. The Rockets played them kind of close the other night, but then the Lakers eventually pulled away, and I see the same thing happening again. So Lakers minus 10.5. Don't like laying that many points, but hey, here we are. So as mentioned, a ton to talk about as we recap the weekend in both the NCAA and NFL, and Matt Russell is set to join us to discuss all of that and more right about now. Well, the Chiefs tax appears to be alive and well. And when we last spoke to this man, Mr. Matt Russell, he was very confident in telling me that the 9.5 points was way too much and that it would get up to 10. All of that was correct. Right. And so after watching the Giants and Chiefs on Monday night, what's your biggest takeaway after the Chiefs 20-17 victory against Danny Dimes and company?
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because you do the takeaways thing, and I write a column every Monday about betting takeaways and the ratings, et cetera, right? And then there's a lot of times there's some sort of upset or something happens, and I'm like, yeah, my takeaway is kind of nothing. Like it's the same thing that we thought going into the week, right? And that's what we talk about when we win these bets.
As a wise man once said, they are who we thought they were.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, we won the bet because this team was who we thought they were, right? We talked about it last week in the Thursday night game where it's like, yeah, we bet the Packers because we didn't think that the Cardinals were quote unquote that, all caps, great. And so I look at last night's game and like, as far as the betting, the market is concerned, that number is 9.5, 10, like gets up to 10.5. You could even get some 11s at some point. And I'm like, who are these people who are betting on the Chiefs? Because you mentioned that, the Chiefs tax, and we got deep into the weeds dudes with like grease and like and an economic disaster. Like that's what the Chiefs are right now in the marketplace. They're an economic disaster, but like we know that going in. So like, who are these people who are pushing this number to 10, 10 and a half, 11? Like, who are these people? Jerry Seinfeld. But my takeaway yesterday wasn't like that, Chiefs are fixed. Obviously that's not the case, or that the Chiefs are broken, because we kind of already thought that to be the case, because now these teams are playing this double high safety, keep everything in front of them, right? And it's getting, they're trying to force things down the field. So like nothing there is necessarily new. But my takeaway from yesterday is just the reiteration of an old saying, right? And it's an old proverb, I guess it is, right? It's better to be silent and let people think you're a fool than to open your mouth and prove it. And to me, that's Joe Judge and the New York Giants, right? Because if you just hide in the sixth best game on Sunday at 1:00, right? We don't know how much of a fool you actually are. But when you're put on center stage on Monday Night Football, on Sunday Night Football, in primetime games of any kind, we now get to find out what kind of a fool you really are. And that Giants team had every opportunity to win that game last night. And they probably should have. Now, they didn't have some big lead that they blew, so it was a little bit different. It was like, oh, they're just kind of hanging around. They're hanging around here. But when you add up all of the stuff that was just undisciplined, coaching mistakes, guys jumping off sides, taking 15-yard taunting penalties, like, did you just find out that was a rule? We're on week 8 here, man. Like, we got to know what taunting is and what taunting isn't. But if it isn't drilled into your head, and it's funny because Joe Judge comes from Bill Belichick, right? He was the special teams coach for the Patriots for a little while there. And I'm watching the Patriots-Chargers game the other day, and Bill Belichick and that team is running like the world's longest time-consuming drive at the end of that game when they're up 7 points. And every one of those players knows to fall down in bounds to keep the clock going. Receivers, running backs. There wasn't one guy who just dumbly went out of bounds or just did something stupid, right? They knew we don't even need a touchdown here. We just need a field goal. Let's keep it in bounds. And that's the difference, right? Belichick has every one of those players knowing exactly what they're supposed to do. And he's hiring these players, if you will, based on their intellect and their football acumen. Meanwhile, Joe Judge has guys jumping off sides. That's an interception gone awry, right? The 15-yard taunting penalty. And Judge doesn't even know when to use his timeout. And so he doesn't realize downs, distance, time on the clock, 2-minute warning. Like, take the timeout with 2.5 minutes to go here, because you have the 2-minute, the 2-minute warning coming up.
Yeah.
And you know that the Chiefs are probably going to have to throw here at some point, which they did. Now, Patrick Mahomes goes down and takes a sack, and you go like, oh, like that's a disaster. It's not, because it's a field goal no matter what. And even Patrick Mahomes, who's been forcing balls all season long, he knows the time and space that he's in. And he knows that he just goes down here and we can keep the clock going, because he knows how many timeouts the Giants have. And that ends up turning it into a whole rush situation where they only have a minute to go instead of 2 minutes to go in the game. And so like, I just look at Joe Judge and I go, it was the same thing for Vic Fangio on Sunday, right? You watch the end game there and you're just like, honestly, even if they win, he should be fired on the spot. Same thing with Joe Judge, right? Because they could have pulled off some crazy play at the end, and who knows, right? Ball bounces and lands in somebody's hand or whatever, and the Giants end up winning that game. But like, we now know, right, what Joe Judge is. And this guy is an absolute stooge, and like, it's just never going to work with Joe Judge. And so we wouldn't necessarily have known that, except for it's all out in the open on a primetime game. And now we see, oh, Joe Judge doesn't know what he's doing and doesn't have any control here halfway through year 2 of what his guys are doing on the field. And so for me, that's the big takeaway. Now, it doesn't really change much as far as betting is concerned, right? Because they cover, we get the cover, everybody's happy. Like, we would have loved the money line win, right? Like, we had that as a finisher to the money line parlay. But, like, you just sort of shrug your shoulders and you go like, what do we do with this league, right? Because even though this coach is clearly incompetent, didn't really matter, because if you're going to start handing out 10 points with the Kansas City Chiefs, we're going to absolutely take that every single time.
Yeah. And you mentioned being so close on the money line parlay. I mean, the parlay did hit. 3 of the 5 hit. And I mean, we talked about it, and you obviously gave out those picks as well on the Friday pod, which I hope people are listening to, because again, I mentioned it in the opening, but the Saints, Patriots, and Panthers all hit as outright underdogs here. So it was a pretty solid week. We mentioned, having the Giants at close to or double-digit points. The other New York team, though, and this was one where I'm going to be honest with you, I had trouble having faith in both New York teams, but both New York teams actually almost won, as the New York Jets won outright against everyone's favorite team for 1 week at least, the Bengals, with a 34-31 win. And you were the first person, and I'm still going to say the only person, to bring up the name Mike White to me, right? In the circles that I'm in, right?
Yeah.
You knew more about Mike White than anyone else that I've been able to talk to or listen to heading into this game. And my guy balled out because you were describing the fact that he was serviceable. And we saw that and more. But in terms of this outright victory for the Jets, I mean, is it overreaction time for the Bengals, or just a week they're kind of feeling themselves, reading their own press clippings, or what was going on there, man?
Yeah. We talk about it, right? Like Tuesday is the talk about the ratings, talk about the range, talk about the concepts, right? And that's what we do on Tuesday. And Cincinnati is just one of those teams that's going to have a really big range to their game. And that happens when your team is really young. And this isn't a Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, like that type of thing, but it's a young team as far as like, are they glued together here? Have they been through the battles, right?
And they're coach too, right?
Yeah, well, relatively speaking, yes, certainly a young coach who also, we'd probably keep him off of prime time for a little while before we sort of get the magnifying glass out on what's going on over there with Zach Taylor. But that's the point, right? Like whether it's the coaches kind of keeping the team down, not having them ready to go, or just the idea that like we're a young team, we're super excited. Like, how do you handle success? You and I talk about that. We've talked about that for a long time with some of these teams. How do you handle success? And going on the road and beating the Ravens in the AFC North is certainly success, right? And then they go on the road the next week. And like, by the way, they have the Browns this coming week. So again, like full on sandwich type situation here. And we talked about, for all of these sort of narrative things that like we've kind of think that we've proven with this loss, it just came down to the fact that like, just from a number standpoint, right? Like the Bengals were 3.5-point favorites a week ago in this game in the look ahead line, right? So think about it just now. If we looked at the lines for next, not this coming Sunday, but the following Sunday, and then something happens and drastically changes those lines, like what actually happened? Well, Cincinnati played really well against Baltimore. Everybody got excited about it. And then Zach Wilson got hurt and Mike White came in. And we talked about it on Friday. Like, are we positive Mike White is discernibly worse than Zach Wilson? Because he's been around the league for a little while, right? He was in the vaunted Cowboys at quarterback room with Cooper Rush and Dak Prescott, future Hall of Famers, apparently. So he's been around, he's been in the league, right? He's got a more veteran presence than Zach Wilson. We talked about the Ernest Johnson effect here, right? Like Mike White's getting his chance. Like the family's in the crowd, everybody's going crazy. Or was that Cooper Rush, or was that Trevor Siemian? It's hard to keep track at this point. And so you go, okay, well, just from a value standpoint, right? Like we're getting 10.5 points there too. And it's like, it was 3.5 a week and a half ago. And like, what is that extra touchdown coming from other than just public perception, right? So whether or not they win or they lose, or who, covers whatever, at one point that's an 11-point game, right? It looked like the Bengals might still somehow cover, for all of that, right? Just fundamentally, it was a good bet from a value standpoint. Now it came through because Mike White ended up being at the very least just as good as Zach Wilson, maybe even better, at least for one day. So how that translates going forward, that remains to be seen. But from a Bengals standpoint, right, like another big game this week, I imagine they're going to be a little bit more locked in, a little more focused, sort of shot back to reality here with that loss to the Jets. But like, that's what you're going to get with a team that can play down to the point where, as we talked about, like, if you can be 14 points down in the first half to the Jags and very close to 21 points down to the Jags, a lot of different options down on the low end of a range can exist. And if you can go on the road and beat the Ravens, a lot of options at the top end of your range can exist. So this is a really sort of up and down team that's going to have to learn here how to be more consistent, like some of the veteran teams that you and I talk about, the Patriots, the Packers, et cetera, right? And that's just what it is, right? It doesn't mean they're bad or they're good or they're great or they're terrible. It just means they're capable of anything. And like, it's the Bengals. Would you expect anything different?
Yeah. And I mean, that's just the spot they were in this week. I totally understand what you're saying. Totally get it. And we'll have more Jets talk, which sounds like just a funny thing to say about the Jets.
Yeah,
but
get excited.
They play on Thursday night. I don't know how much of a tease that is, but we'll get to the picks later on. Maybe that's the way I should tease it. But
I'm on the edge of my seat. Let's go.
The backup talk continues because you mentioned Trevor Siemian, who was in for an injured Jameis Winston. And, shouts to Jameis, because even the video of him dancing in the locker room after on his one leg, it's like Jameis is just entertaining. No matter what's going on, Jameis is the show. But Trevor Siemian comes in, leads the Saints to a 36-27 win, securing the upset pick of the week from the pod, or the red light special, as we like to call it. But you brought up the fact that the Bucks, it's just a bad matchup for them, the Saints.
Yeah.
And we saw it yet again. And how did that play out for you in reality, despite the fact, like, again, I guess they are who we thought they were?
Well, yeah, again, it's kind of the same thing, right? Where it's like, okay, when it comes to matchups, right? Mm-hmm. And these different teams, like, you do what you do, right? And the Bucks are very good at what they do. And when they have a billion different weapons, Gronkowski's healthy. And, we talked about Antonio Brown being that, like, man-to-man, a weapon, right? That when teams are pure man-to-man, we talked about Marcus Lattimore locking down Mike Evans. And again, all of this stuff comes to fruition. So, it is what it is. Like, you can't just all of a sudden, like, Evans isn't just all of a sudden going to be great against Lattimore, right? Like, he had obviously some moments, which was kind of, quote unquote, nice for him. And Brady had way more yards than he had in the previous three matchups. So you sit back and you go, okay, a little bit different from that standpoint. So, but there was a reason the Saints were able to build that lead, right? And it was on the strength of defense, right? A fumble recovery and interception, obviously the interception late in the game to seal it as well. And so, like, the numbers at the end, you go, 3 turnovers from Brady, right? Like, this Saints team just has what it takes to kind of lock him down a little bit. Now, he still had 370 some odd yards, whatever. So it's all relative at this point. But you and I talk all the time about how defense is about getting turnovers and turning touchdown drives into field goal drives and sort of limiting the offense from that standpoint, not being like this, like, vaunted defense that nobody can move the ball against, because that's just not allowed anymore in the NFL. And so, Antonio Brown, if he's back for their next matchup, could be a lot different, right, from that standpoint. Offensively for the Saints, I'm still not sure how they kind of pulled that off, right? But, like, at the end of the day, it's Sean Payton. Sean Payton as an underdog, Sean Payton at home, like, there's some issues with, again, play calling and time using up the clock and that sort of thing. And you're like, why are you throwing on first down? Like, make them use their timeouts. Like, there's no benefit to you scoring a touchdown on first down late in that game, because you're just going to have to go for 2. And even if you get it, like, you're still only up 7 and Tom Brady's got a full 2 minutes with all his timeouts, like, you're still in really, really big trouble. And if anybody should know that, it's Sean Payton, because he had Drew Brees doing that for like 20 years, basically. And it's like, man, how this works. If you were on the other side, like, you would be fine with, I mean, maybe not fine, but, like, you would be pretty content with getting the ball back in your quarterback's hands for that long. But again, like, as an underdog, it's going to be different this week. As a favorite, as right? We go highs here of beating Tampa Bay, and now we go into the lows of playing the Falcons, right? And it's like Trevor Siemian may come back to existence, right? He may come back to life here. And it's the difference between, like, okay, do we want to lay 6 points or do we want to take 6 points and allow for all of the things that taking the points in these cases allows us to kind of, the little room to maneuver, right? Like, stuff can happen and we can still manage to cover a game versus everything needing to go right and having to have a dominant performance to be able to cover a number as big as 4.5, 5, 6 points. And so that's why we were happy to take the points with the Saints, because that, the matchup works. Sean Payton as an underdog is always kind of a great option from an offense that is going to be able to do something, because he's just going to cook it up. And you've got random fullbacks catching touchdowns. Kevin White is back from the dead on his 11th team as a former first round pick as a wide receiver. He's catching a long pass. It's just random dude after random dude, because again, the structure is there, right? Like we talk about all the time. Maybe they're 10% less talented than the guys that they're replacing. The guys are supposed to be in there, but they know where to go and they have the timing down, right? So Trevor Siemian can get you around the field here. It's not going to be spectacular, but as long as a couple of plays hit, you're going to be just fine. Now they get a little bit help with some penalty issue, situation. And like, I'm on the Saints, so I'm glad it's there, but like, are those really penalties? I'm not really sure. Well, like, in the NFL, they certainly are, right? Like certainly less has been called when it comes to roughing the passer or some of these other, nonsense things that have been injected into the game, but I digress. So yeah, nothing a ton of surprising there, obviously, because we thought the Saints had a chance to win. Was just nice to see. Again, pour one out for Jameis. We thought there'd be a nice big game for him. He left at 7-7 in the game, thought they were toast once that happened, especially no Taysom Hill either. But again, this is a watch out spot, right? If you've already bet on the Saints here this weekend, like look out, because we'll talk about it a little bit more on Friday here with this matchup coming up, but it's going to be a tricky spot for the Saints to get back up after that big win.
A crazy win for the Saints for sure. And, some might say crazy win for the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday night. And we were talking about the line movement all last week. And it was really, from my standpoint, as, continue to learn more about paying attention to the lines and the line movements and what it could mean. I thought it was one of the biggest things to pay attention to heading into Sunday, because we talked about the fact of where that line was, what it was trying to tell you, and that someone knew Dak Prescott wasn't going to play, right? Because there's no way that line makes sense if people thought Dak was going to play. He doesn't. So you go into the game, the line moves from 2.5 to 4.5.
Yeah.
And then Cooper Rush is balling. It's just
I know, right?
The NFL, man, the NFL.
That's right.
People actually bet money on this stuff.
I know, and it's right. Like, and I heard somebody talking about like the idea of like these guys who are in this league, even at the sort of bottom rungs, right? Like the Trevor Simeons, the Cooper Rushes, who are just managed to hang in there. And it's like they're on their third team, and like the perseverance that it takes, but also just like they've got to be good, right? Because they aren't just tricking one team into drafting them the way that we've seen like guys getting tricked into a first round draft choice. These guys are having to work, and they have to be good enough to, impress this general manager and to a point. And like, if that team lets him go, then he has to impress this coaching staff and then go to another one. Like, these clearly has some talent that if multiple teams are giving them an opportunity, like that's something, right? And I bet you the Cowboys wish they had Cooper Rush, that they had, thrown a couple of extra bucks his way last year to have him on the roster, because he probably would have cured a fair amount of things that ailed the Cowboys with some of the dregs of the quarterback universe that the Cowboys rolled out there.
Ben
right?
DiNucci? Was that my guy?
Yeah, we had the Nooch. Our boy, the Nooch, was out there. And you're like, I don't think Nooch is going to trick anybody else in. Because remember, wasn't he like the son-in-law of the coach? Or like he met like ridiculous McCarthy in an elevator or something. And it was like, now he's starting on Sunday Night Football. And you're like, wait, what? Like, when do I get to play? And so, fundamentally from a line movement standpoint, like, we talked about it. Like, why wasn't this off the board? Because if there was more uncertainty, it would just be flat out off the board. And it's interesting because, like, whether it's sports books or, sharp bettors out there who have the information, who know what's going on. And so this is my read on the situation. Mm-hmm. They know Dak, somebody out there knows Dak is out. And then that means that Cooper Rush is going to play. And you and I go, well, I don't know what to make of Cooper Rush. He's got 2 passes in his like lifetime here in the NFL. But somebody out there knows the difference between Ben DiNucci and Cooper Rush. And so when the line gets reopened, there's enough money there to keep that line from getting out of control. There's enough money bet on the Cowboys at +3, for example. Now, again, he gets announced out officially Sunday night, a flood of money. Everybody's throwing their 20, 50 bucks on the Vikings at that point, 2.5, 3, hopefully not any larger than that. And so it's, gets up to 4.5, right? And like, that sharp money that took the Vikings, like that's already spoken at that point, right? Like they are of the belief that line is getting out of hand. And that's why you don't see that go to 5, 6, because if we just said, okay, well, the Dakless Cowboys from last season, like that line has to be 5.5 or 6, unless they actually have a serviceable backup. And if we knew that their backup was serviceable, then we probably would have been more likely to back the Cowboys. But you and I don't necessarily know that. We're not necessarily ready to believe that. Same thing with the Mike White situation, right? If we had known for sure that Mike White was capable, we would have backed them even harder than we already did at +10.5, et cetera, et cetera. Now, all that is to say, like, They probably still should have lost the game, right? Like we got a 2nd and 10 where balls are bouncing off of the cornerback's chest, like landing directly in Amari Cooper's hands for a big gain. Like if that falls to the ground, we're talking about a 3rd and 10 and then potentially a 4th and 10, right? Like the referees are taking timeouts from the Vikings defense when they're not supposed to, and then having to penalize them for that. And a 3rd and 16 turns into a 3rd and 11, and Zeke Elliott catches a check down and gets 12 yards, right? Busts 2 tackles, gets 12 yards instead of 17 yards that he might necessarily need. So a lot had to go right there at the end. Obviously, you could play the whole game about like this penalty shouldn't have been called or that penalty shouldn't have been called. But when it came right down to it, right? Like that was some pretty kind of fortunate stuff there at the end for the Cowboys. But the point is they were in the game because they had a serviceable backup quarterback, right? The most important player on your team is the backup quarterback, right? Because at any given Sunday, things can go awry for the starter, which we saw a ton this week. So yeah, like the line movement was fascinating. I was fascinated by the fact that it wasn't taken off the board. And it didn't have like some strong lean on either side in a lot of ways. I was on the Vikings if Dak was going to play and we were going to get the full 3 points, right? But then things change. And because all of that uncertainty, it becomes certainly a less strong of a bet. And if you had +3 and you got there early on Monday, and then all of this stuff happens and it closes 4.5, like you got to just be sitting there going like, what? And I lose that bet somehow. Like that is a brutal way to go. Cause we don't talk about it necessarily a ton, but the concept of closing line value, right? And the idea of beating the market. We beat the market in a couple of different spots last week. Look at the Browns game. One of the most things I was most proud of last week was talking about the Browns and like betting them at -3 and you and I said, I'm like, I've got this line close to 6. I don't know why this number is down at 3. And the line closed 5.5, right? On kind of nothing, right? Like, Baker came back and maybe that's what moved it, I guess. But again, I think that's a mistake. If we're making 2.5 point moves on Baker Mayfield versus Case Keenum, like that's just a massive mistake. And I know I'm kind of off the rails here from Cowboys Vikings, but like it's all the same, right? When these lines move and you have to, and like you bet back the other way, or you've beaten the line, you don't have a tendency to want to bet back the other way because you're already committed to this closing line value that you got, even though you're sitting back and going like, wait, Baker Mayfield +5.5 against the Steelers, even as ugly as the Steelers still were in that victory, or same thing with the Cowboys at +4.5. If you're sitting there with, Minnesota +3, you're never going to bet back on the +4.5, or it's going to be very hard for you from a discipline standpoint to bet back on Cooper Rush, knowing that you've got such great value in those numbers. So whether it was Cleveland -3 or Minnesota +3, like you had to be sitting there loving the bet that you made. And then all of a sudden, right, halfway through the game, you're sitting there going like, this is going to be a problem here because these coaches and quarterbacks, right, Baker and Kirk Cousins, for example, are just not going to let you win by a margin in this league. And that's how tough it is in this league to win by a margin, unless you're playing a team that's really, really bad.
Yeah. Or it's easy when you have a coach like Bill Belichick, who somehow continues to do it year after year after year. And I guess this is the theme of this pod. They are who we thought they were, because we're sitting here on the Patriots and Bill Belichick being able to do what he does against Justin Herbert and the Chargers, as the Pats not only win and cover, but they win as outright underdogs. I said that in a long, convoluted way, but you get the point of what I'm saying. I don't even really want to talk about that game too much. I'd rather spend the time discussing Carson Wentz, because if we have the Chiefs tax, right? I don't know what we call the Carson Wentz tax or what. I don't know how we kind of make up something for that. But Carson Wentz gives me gambling nightmares, because whether I'm on Carson Wentz or I'm betting against Carson Wentz, it's just a roller coaster of emotions. And a lot of times when people use the word literally, but they use it incorrectly.
Yeah, do it all the time.
This is one of those this is one of those instances where I can confidently say that Carson Wentz literally lost the game for his team.
Yeah.
Right. And I believe that I'm using that correctly. Like that interception my guy threw. No, but that interception my guy throws from his end zone, like where I've never week after week makes plays I've never seen made in an NFL game. I don't know how he does it. I really don't. And so I'm saying all this whole, like, I don't even know what the question is here, but just help me, because it's just, he makes me emotional when I'm watching him just do utter bleepery.
Yeah. And you're just, it's like
you're riding on Carson Wentz,
and you're ready for it, but at the same time, like, you're not ready for it, because like he manages, as much as you're ready for the Carson Wentzification for a game to go down at any point, right? He just Wentzifies everything. And like, you know that it's there, right? And it's possible at any time. Like even like first and 10, you're like, well, he's not going to do it on first and 10. Like, that would be insane. It's like, yeah, how's a left-handed throw from my end zone, 2 yards down, 2 yards away? And like, I don't know, maybe Carson Wentz is out here playing chess while we're playing checkers, because if he takes a safety there, right, it's 2 points for Tennessee, and Tennessee gets the ball and can run out the clock. And if he throws it directly to the other team and they catch it and they run for a touchdown, guess who gets the ball back? Carson Wentz does. Boom, what's up? And then now he can go down the field and they can throw their Joe Flacco offense at you, where it's let's get a PI down the field, and they get, of course, the touchdown to force overtime, right? Galaxy brain type stuff there from our guy Carson Wentz, right? So just when you think Carson Wentz doesn't know what he's doing, he absolutely does. Now, does he have to do it left-handed, like chucking it while he's getting tackled? No, but that's just the magic of Carson Wentz, right? He's out here tricking you into thinking he doesn't know exactly what he's doing when he does. No, I mean, let's be honest, man, like this, it's brutal, right? And so, but even that being the case, we talked about this game being interesting from a line movement standpoint, flipping all the way over to Tennessee was getting 3 points at one point. And I talked about it with you. I'm like, if you like Tennessee, man, like I think you're going to get 3 points here if it hadn't already been at 3. And I don't even blame you, right? Like we can sit here closing line value. If you got the Colts early as an underdog, which a lot of people did, or even just at -1, again, you're sitting there, whether it's Cleveland -3, Minnesota +3, Indy at like anything under pick 'em basically, or -1, you're sitting there going like, I did it. Like that's all I can do. Now they can play the football game here, but I got the best possible number here. I got some great value relative to the market. And then what happens. And what happens is the Colts take a 14-0 lead, and you go like, see, the market knew, like the sharp money early in the week knew, like we all knew like what was up here, because it's 14-0 Colts, and it's 14-7, and Ryan Tannehill throws an interception. And like, I don't know what Carson Wentz has to do with this. He might have something to do with it, but the defensive player blows out his knee, drops the ball before he goes to the ground, or before he's touched well on the ground, and Tennessee gets the ball right back. And literally the next play, I don't know if I'm using that correctly because it might have been 2 plays later, but let's just say that it was the very next play. AJ Brown goes for the long touchdown, and you're like, we were just Colts with the ball, a turnover, 14-7, to now it's 14-14. And like, now we got some problems here if you're backing the Colts. Now this, long story short, goes from 14-14 to like 31-31 or whatever it was, and goes to overtime. So there's plenty of opportunities. The Colts win the toss and of course give the ball right back to the Titans. And then of course they get the ball back again, and he throws the, game sealing essentially interception. And so all of that is to say, like, this was a coin toss game that the Colts probably should have won.
Yep.
And when you factor all that in, then like money on the Colts makes some sense. But again, Carson Wentz will always step in and take that away from you. And, again, it's frustrating to watch because like there's so much there potentially, and we're going to see it in prime time on Thursday. There's so much there, but there always is, right? It's always the tantalizing talent and playmaking ability of Carson Wentz. And then the playmaking ability for the other team that he provides as well is infuriating. But, it's just, he's never going to change. You always have to have your guard up, and it's always going to happen at the last possible moment that you expect.
Yeah, it's always a thing right when I think I've seen the worst, he just tops it the next week.
Yeah.
We will talk more about Carson Wentz and the Colts. See, that's another tease.
Double
tease. I don't know if that one's better than the tease saying we're going to talk about the Jets more, but hey.
I'm fast forwarding right now. I want to get right to it.
Skipping ahead. And of course, we'll have a lot more on the NFL lines and movements and what your picks should be on Friday's pod. But I want to make sure that we have enough time here to discuss a big weekend in the NCAA. And that's because, I know you're excited about this, but Tuesday is the first day that the college football rankings are coming out. And I know you're fired up about that, right? I know you're fired up about that. But after this past weekend, what kind of is sticking out to you the most heading into this announcement? Like, what are you looking forward to the most? Who is it that you're like, this team's going to get screwed, but don't worry about it yet because there's still time to work it out? Because to me, I'm always still thinking about where Alabama fits in and how much we're rating their loss so far. But talk to me here. Talk to me about the football rankings.
Yeah. And listen, man, like the weirdos and sickos who want to play Christmas music already. And, like the Christmas commercials are out there going on. And a lot of people be like, can you wait till after Halloween? I would say, can you wait till after US Thanksgiving?
At least.
I would say at least we got to wait till the first college football playoff rankings are out before the Christmas music comes out, because that's what it is, right? Like college football season, like it starts and then conference season comes in October and we start getting some matchups, start shaking down who's good and who's not. But like, it's not, we can't see the end. We can't see the finish until it's Tuesday night and the college football ranking show pops up. And then everybody's up in arms about who the four are and who got left out. And like this year, it's going to be, where is Oregon relative to Ohio State? Right. And I don't know what's going to happen. And that's the fun part about all this. And it's fun because there's like, 5 or 6 more of these before we get to the actual real one. So like, it doesn't really matter. Matters for a couple of teams though, right? It matters for Cincinnati because the idea is you want to sort of, we talk musical chairs when it comes to, football endings here. This is musical chairs. This is get your 4 seats in the college football playoff. And if Cincinnati can have one of those seats and then win out the rest of the way, it's going to take a lot for somebody to make the case to bump them the hell out of there. Right. And so like, get your seat while you can, Cincinnati. Now I would be, the way that you sort of look at how things work in college football, like having them in the 5th spot seems like something the college football playoff would do, right? To just kind of give themselves an opportunity to leave Cincinnati out but also leave the door open that, okay, well, if one of these other teams loses here, you might be back in, right? And you mentioned Alabama, right? Like, where do they deserve to be? Because, Oklahoma is going to be in that top 4. Obviously, Georgia is going to be that top 4. And then after that, right, we talked about Ohio State, Oregon, who's going to sort of get in that spot, right? Obviously, Oregon with the win over Ohio State is why that's so interesting. Ohio State didn't look overly impressive against Penn State, as people were trying to tell us. We were on this show last week talking about take the 18.5 points with Penn State. And then all I heard the rest of the weekend was how Ohio State was going to blow out Penn State. And guess who won that cash comfortably? You and I did. That was really fun. And so, Ohio State doesn't look that great. So like the case for, them hopping over Oregon, I think is going to be interesting, and whether or not that gets made. So yeah, I mean, it's just gonna be interesting to see sort of the start here, the shakedown. Where does Notre Dame fit in all of this? Because remember, somehow they're still with 1 loss and they're getting better, right? They have covered a couple of games here down the stretch. I always think they should have, and this is a little bit of bias here, and I'm available to them if they need me, that they should have a better, right? Who knows this stuff, who has ratings, who has all of that. They should have this person on the committee to say, like, okay, like, is Cincinnati impressive? Is Notre Dame impressive? And it's like, well, did they cover? Because the market has set a bar for these teams every single week. And if you hop over that bar, you should get credit for it. And right now it's sort of this ambiguous thing where it's like, well, did they win by a lot of points or did they not win by a lot of points? And it's like, well, were they supposed to win by a lot of points or were they not supposed to win by a lot of points? Right. So anyway, that's a little diatribe for me there. So again, this is where we get to start framing our opinions, where we get to be irate about something, and then we get to sort of see the chess pieces move here a little bit. So again, it doesn't really matter all that much. By and large, it's a TV show. Obviously, I will absolutely tune in. They have me hook, line, and sinker here. But yeah, it's just outside of Cincinnati, hoping to maybe get that one of those 4 spots for them. And the rest of it, there's still a lot too much to sort of shake down here. So look for Cincinnati. Do they not get the top 4 spot? And then again, obviously Oregon, Ohio State, how is that going to shake down there in the top 5 or 6?
Yeah. Another big one that we had picked out last week, if I'm not mistaken, was Michigan State. And just what the line was there, and a crazy game, a crazy scene first off, like just in terms of from a viewer perspective and just seeing like just the atmosphere and how amazing that was. But my boy Harbaugh, and as a Niners fan, I still call him and refer to him as my boy Harbaugh.
Right.
It's a tough go for him, isn't it? Like,
right.
I mean, a tough loss there, but you were on Michigan State, no?
Yeah. We had Michigan State last week. We had a little money line action there as well. And it's Harbaugh, man. He's a cash machine. He's a cash machine for all the wrong reasons, right? He's a cash machine. If there's a big game where he is a favorite, if they are going on the road as a favorite in said big game, and it really shone a light on the rivalry between Michigan and Michigan State, right? And Michigan is in a lot of ways concerned with, the Buckeyes, and which is hilarious because the Buckeyes just pound them every year. Meanwhile, they're like less concerned with Michigan State, whereas Michigan State has some legitimate hatred for Michigan. And well, they should, because they're trying to get Michigan's attention. And all they do every year is beat Michigan to try to get the attention from Michigan. And like, they still can't do it. Like, it's kind of funny. So yeah, that was kind of cool to sort of see the hate that the Spartans have for the Wolverines. And the Wolverines are just in this, they're just kind of in denial right now, man. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just sort of like, oh yeah, we're better than them. It's like, yeah, but you're kind of not, right? Like, you're kind of not better than them, and they keep beating you. And so
you're so right about the hate though, because what came across my timeline yesterday was Draymond Green trick-or-treating with his kid. And then he stopped to take a video of this woman who had a Michigan State Spartan in her pumpkin outside of her house.
Okay.
And so Draymond, like, it's just like the depths of this hate. Like, he just popped up on his Instagram just to be like, hey, I had to stop and show this lady some love. And it's like this old lady. And obviously he's in San Francisco trick-or-treating with this kid. And he's just like, hey, this is how far we reach. Sparty, blah, blah, blah. Tough go, Michigan. Right. I'm like, how are you getting trolled while trick-or-treating? Right? Like, just like, but this is the levels to it. This is the levels,
right? And so, yeah, we're able to cash there. But the bigger picture here, and I don't know if you're ready to talk a little Heisman. Are you ready to do a little Heisman watch?
Always.
We've been sitting around, right? You and I just sitting here twiddling our thumbs every Tuesday, waiting for something to happen in the Heisman watch, right? We're sitting there going like, Matt Corral, like, really? And like Bryce Young as like this just default Alabama quarterback placeholder. And it's like, really? Like, one of those two guys is going to win the Heisman. And we thought, okay, like, it's creating value down the board here. We're waiting for different guys to pop up here. By the way, our guy Kenny Pickett had 500 yards passing. And I don't know if we're blaming him for the loss over Miami or against Miami to Miami. That seems a little irrational, but like 500 yards, is that not okay?
Not bad.
But Kenneth Walker, right, goes off 5 touchdowns in this game, and he goes, 197-5. What's up? Like, Heisman moment, because up until that point, you and I were joking, like, the best play we've seen all year is Caleb Williams grabbing the ball out of his teammate's hand to get over the fourth down, over for a 4th down conversion. And like, now we finally have like an old school, like, well, let's play a clip here, on that Saturday in downtown New York. Let's play a clip of him just absolutely working over the rival Michigan Wolverines. And so we were hesitant because he was, plus 800, 10-1, something along those lines. And we're hesitant because we're like, he's got the tough part of his schedule here. If you have access to a book who has him at 5-1 right now, run, do not walk, run to bet Kenneth Walker, especially if you have Kenny Pickett. Because Sheldon, I don't know if you remember the last music festival that you went to, but I'm going to invite you to a festival. It's called Ken Fest, and it's happening in New York at the Downtown Athletic Club, because we got Kenny Pickett, Kenneth Walker, and I don't know, maybe some other guy named Ken pops up. Maybe it's Ken Jeong. Ken Jeong was out doing College Game Day, so maybe he goes to New York. Maybe he's a Heisman candidate. At this point, it's tough to find a third, because I don't think Bryce Young is going to win this. I think Bryce Young right now acts as this anchor, allowing other people to have value, right? Because he exists as the favorite, and that means other people are not the favorite. But I don't believe that Bryce Young is the favorite. I don't believe if you polled voters today that they would say, yup, Bryce Young is my guy, especially after what happened on Saturday. Now, the problem is, if you will, We got another 4 weeks, another 4 games here for Michigan State, a lot of toughies in there. But if you can run for 200 yards and you can score 5 touchdowns against the Michigan Wolverines, you can do that against Ohio State. You can do that against some other teams in the Big Ten. And lo and behold, if he did do that against Ohio State, then it's just wrap it up. Yeah. It's a lock here, right? So we have the market surrounded, right? We've got our Kenny Pickett's, we've got our Bijan Robinson. That doesn't look like it's going to work out as far as like, obviously Kenneth Walker has shown more than Bijan Robinson. So he takes the lead in sort of the running back category. The quarterback category, we've seen now Matt Corral has fallen back. He's back into the plus 450 type range, which I think is just sort of the beginning of his fall, if you will, from a Heisman standpoint. And so you have Bryce Young just anchoring this sort of favoritism here, but he's not going to win this Heisman. That is what I believe. And I think Kenneth Walker, if you can get the 5-1, this is your chance to up it up a little bit here from a bet standpoint, right? Like you sprinkled a little on the 40-1 guys that we've kind of got our little portfolio going. Now it's time to make a bet on who you think is going to win the Heisman Trophy. And Kenneth Walker at plus 500 right now, 5-1 odds, is as good a value as I think we're going to see this season. Now, hopefully he stays healthy. Hopefully he still stays good. I think that proved that he can. And I think there's a possibility, whether or not they make the Big Ten championship game, which is probably going to require a victory over Ohio State, which obviously is a little bit tricky, though possible since we've seen, Penn State give them a run here, right? So it's a combination of, is Ohio State beatable by Michigan State? And what we've seen from Kenneth Walker here. Kenneth Walker is, I think right now, the possibility of him running away as the favorite for the Heisman and getting there late. You never want to be the favorite early in the Heisman race because people get sick of you, right? I'm already sick of Matt Corral. Everybody's sick of Matt Corral at this point, right? You come in late and you go like, here's our guy. He was this close to doing a Heisman pose in the end zone, I think, at one point. This is the guy here that I think you make a relatively large bet on at 5-1 because you're getting paid out in like 6 weeks. This isn't like, oh, we got to hold money here for 3.5 months. This is like 6 weeks from now. So it's very reasonable to make a nice bet on Kenneth Walker at plus 500.
Okay. Speaking of making nice bets, there's a lot of action going on this week. Then I think we got to start with the action, as the kids like to say. Well, we got Miami of Ohio as 7.5-point favorites at Ohio. Who do you like there?
Listen, I think that's the only one right now of the 5 games of Maction, right? It's like the 12 days of Christmas. Speaking of like, how do we know the holidays are coming? Maction gets started on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, right? Yep. You could see they cleared everything on Saturday. There was one conference game on Saturday because they know now it's midweek Maction time. We got to get fired up, everybody. And so, Ohio is the one team that I show a ton of value in this week. Their home game against Miami of Ohio. We've backed Ohio before to varying degrees of success. They played their first month of the season. There was a lot of Power 5 games in there, Northwestern, Syracuse. They played Louisiana, who's obviously a very good team, if not a Power 5 team, but probably better than those other 2 teams that I just mentioned. Mm-hmm. And it didn't go great. So the record's looking really bad, right? It's like 1-7. Well, that's going to happen when you lose those games. They also lost to Duquesne, which was not very good because Duquesne's not even a top pro, not even an FBS school at this point. So they go, 0-4 to start the season. But once conference season starts, once MAC season starts, it's now 1-3, I think, in October. They got the win over Akron, but those 3 losses were very close losses. This team is close to putting together a performance that's going to get them over the hump to win a game. By the way, we don't need them to even do that. We don't need them to win a game. We just need them to keep it close against a Miami of Ohio team here. I think it's a little over their skis as far as what their record is. Now, it's only 4-4, but, once you get past Akron and to a lesser extent Bowling Green, who we've been on and, again, had a ton of success with, all these MAC teams are just kind of the same this year. There isn't that one good team, Western Michigan, the old row the boat days where they end up in a top bowl game. None of that's happening this year. So I think Ohio's getting a little less credit because of how their season started and the record. It looks really bad. We're getting 7.5 points at home with Ohio on Tuesday. To me, that's by far the best value on a game, on a day that has Ball State minus 20.5 at Akron. Don't really want anything to do with that. Eastern Michigan's at Toledo. They're 8.5 point underdogs. I don't really trust trust Toledo to win and cover that game, nor do I want Eastern Michigan. And then Wednesday, Central Michigan and Western Michigan. I would lean to taking all those points with Central Michigan as they are 10-point underdogs. And then maybe if Kent State fell to -3, I'd look at Kent State -3 over Northern Illinois, but by far the best value here. I have Ohio closer to like a 3-point underdog in this game, and we're getting 7.5. So of Maction, this is where I will have my money on Tuesday.
I like it. A couple other games though going on Thursday. You got Georgia State at Louisiana, -12. Louisiana is favored by.
Yeah, this is interesting, right? And we come on the Sun Belt has been doing their, Fun Belt stuff for a little while here now, right? And then we talk about it on the Tuesday show. And there's a lot of like -18s, right? A lot of -20s when it comes to Louisiana, Coastal Carolina, and App State. And we go like, hey, does anybody deserve to be that big of a favorite, right? And then, of course, we bet on the underdog. The underdog hangs in there. We win money. Mm-hmm. And now we're seeing a little bit of an adjustment to these games where it's like, okay, we haven't seen much in the way of a big time cover here. And now instead of this game being 15-16, now it's 12. Now it becomes a little more palatable here if you're looking to back Louisiana, which I am this week. I think Georgia State, they've had some flashes of brilliance, if you will, which is something that we thought we could get from them at the start of the season. It just took them a little while longer to do it. And that's why this number has dropped to where it is. But Louisiana's getting things going here as well. Just absolutely dump truck Texas State last week. That was on me, everybody. I bet Texas State, but we'll get back. Don't worry. So for me, Louisiana -12 here is a little short. Anything under 2 touchdowns, I'll be looking at Louisiana on Thursday. Not necessarily some great bet, but if we're talking about value comparative to what we've seen in the Sun Belt elsewhere, that's what I would do.
I like it. And of course, I'm very interested to know what you would do in the NFL Thursday nighter.
There it is. It's
just
time.
Because it's time. We've been teasing it the whole show. Imagine that. That's the headline. That's like the title of this pod. It's like, tune in for the Jets and Colts preview.
That's right.
1 hour breakdown.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, though, I mean, it is a Thursday nighter, and we do, of course, like to discuss a Thursday nighter. And someone else who also likes to discuss the Thursday nighter is our guy Scott Gramling, who has been on fire as of late. His Sunday 6-pack is actually hit at 11-1 record over the last 2 weeks. So make sure that you head to drf.com/sports for all of those details and insights, because Scott has you covered in a bunch of different ways. A Sunday scoop also on fire, and the game previews. So however you want your betting information, we got you covered. drf.com/sports. And of course, another way we got you covered is this podcast. And as we move into this game, I'm struggling to say this.
Okay.
Carson Wentz and the Colts are 10.5-point favorites at home to the Jets.
Right.
Now,
so
I'm trying to paint a world in which I could possibly talk myself into taking Carson Wentz laying 10.5 points. And I can't find that world. I just can't. Maybe if it was the Colts in some action, maybe if that was going down, I just can't, I can't bring myself to do it. Now, again, I'm not saying that hey, the Colts can't come out and blow out and get the win. I'm not saying that at all.
Right.
I'm just saying, how willing am I to put my hard-earned money on Carson Wentz to cover double-digit point spreads?
Yeah, if they were playing Ball State, I'd be a little more comfortable about it. But unfortunately, Ball State has a game on Tuesday, so that's not going to happen. Okay, so let's break this down here, right? Where do we start? We start with the market. We go, okay, look ahead number. That always kind of, lets us know what we were thinking before things got crazy and before our minds got polluted by what happened on Sunday, right?
Yeah.
So the number was 14. Last week. Okay. So it was 14. Okay. So you start there and you go, okay, immediately the actual value, quote unquote, fundamentally is with betting the Colts. Now you go, okay, well, what's changed? Well, a couple of things have changed. Mainly Mike White. The thing that hasn't changed is anything to do with the Colts, really, except, and this is maybe this is a stretch for some, but T.Y. Hilton's not going to play. And what that means for the Colts, right, is when he or Paris Campbell, neither of those guys play, that means speed becomes an issue on the outside, right? Because you hire those guys, if you will, to be the speed guys to stretch the defense so that Mo Alley Cox is available over the middle, so that Zach Pascal is available over the middle, right? You tight ends, obviously they're big wide receivers, Pittman as well. Now the offense without those guys becomes the pass interference Joe Flacco offense, right? And you go, okay, that's not necessarily what we want to be relying on here if we're the Colts. Obviously, they have the run game in Jonathan Taylor. Now, what has changed, obviously, the Zach Wilson injury, Mike White comes in. And so really this just kind of becomes, how much do you believe in what we saw from Mike White? Because if you believe in Mike White, we mentioned Christmas. How about Santa Claus? Is Mike White Santa Claus? Do we believe in Mike White? How many times do we get sort of wrapped up in the one game sort of sample size, heroic situation? We just talked about it with the Bengals at the Jets and the idea of having this big win, right? And they're all relative, right? The Bengals win to the Ravens is as big as the Jets win is to anybody, right? Like didn't have to do with your opponent. They just got to win, right? Robert Saleh's out there and it's fist pumps galore. And he's reminiscent of his days with the 49ers. And so you turn around, you go on the road and like, do we really want to back the Jets a second time in 5 days? Like that's the question. So from a market standpoint, it's like, okay, does the number going from 14 down to 10.5? If you have this inkling of like, 10.5 with the Jets, like, I think I want to do that, right? Like if that's the inkling, like the sports books, the odds makers, the bettors, like they all know that we're now all of a sudden attracted to the Jets, as sort of crazy as that sounds, because the story of Mike White and Carson Wentz throwing left-handed and all of this stuff sort of exists, right? And so like, my first inclination was 10.5. I'll take it. The Jets could win that game outright because the Jets can play run defense and that can hamstring the Colts, the Colts can blow a team out because their defense is that good. And like a blowout for them looks like a 24-7 type victory because their defense is really good. But like, it isn't because the offense is explosive. And if they don't get any explosive plays out of the running game, which the Jets can stop the Colts from doing, how do the Colts stretch this lead? And if Mike White is functional, where this game is 24-14 and everybody's sort of content with that, certainly on the Colts side of the field, you end up covering under that circumstance. So like we're kind of in between, we're kind of between a rock and a hard place here, right? Where it's like, do I want to back Carson Wentz giving all of those points, or do I want to back the Jets off of a high? Like what about the Jets has ever indicated that after a victory, they should be a team that we should be betting on? Right? Like it doesn't seem like a great idea. So like I might make a small bet here on the Jets plus 10.5. If this line came down any little bit, I would have a hard time doing that. In fact, if it came down to like a 9.5 because everybody just got in on the Jets come Thursday, I'd probably back the Colts coming the other way. I think the Colts are going to be an incredibly popular selection in Survivor. So there's probably a better chance of me just tuning into this game, keeping my fingers crossed that we can go full Joe Namath on this game and have the Jets pull the upset, 50 some odd years later. That's probably where I'm going to just kind of go with it when it comes to this game. Like this is by no means a strong bet. I mean, listen, the way the last two Thursday night games have gone, maybe somebody's going to come down with some sort of injury or COVID situation. The line's going to get crazy and all hell's going to break loose. Who knows, right? Maybe Mike White's going out and partying and he catches one after Sunday. Who knows, right? Like Joe Flacco might be involved. We might actually see the Joe Flacco offense, right? Joe Flacco just coming in, throwing bombs to try to get PIs. And it just be like the Spider-Man meme that you hit me with the other day, like Spider-Man memeing Joe Flacco and Carson Wentz. Like these are all possibilities in our life come Thursday. So yeah, it's controlled chaos at this point, but just understand like that the Jets match up pretty okay defensively with the Colts. Obviously that's a ton of points, but like, how do you handle success? Can the Jets handle success to even keep this game close? I would lean to yes, but I'm not going to like pound the table here on this one.
Yeah, I just have such a hard time, and I would have a harder time taking the Colts by 14 points, even if Zach Wilson was in the mix, right? So
Right.
the whole thing is just really chaotic here, and I don't like any of it at all.
Right.
But if I'm forced to pick, there's no way I could see myself taking Carson Wentz by double-digit points. That's just where I'm at. And as mentioned earlier on in the pod, wherever I'm at with Carson Wentz, sometimes you might have to play the opposite game. I don't know. It's a tough one, but I can't lay money on Carson Wentz by double-digit points. That's just where I feel right now. Maybe, hey,
totally fair.
On Friday, we'll pick this up and see where I'm at on Friday. Cause that might.
Is it possible for neither team to cover? Can we get this game down to 10 and then just have it land on 10? And then so we can all just shrug our shoulders even after the game? How much fun would that be? Jeez.
That would actually be incredible. And hopefully you listened to this pod and found it incredible as well. But Mr. Matt Russell, where can the people find you to get more of your information that you're just handing out the goodness, handing out the winners? And we appreciate that. But where can the people find more from you, man, online?
Yeah, at MRuss Authentic, MRUSS Authentic. And everything that I do over at The Score gets retweeted through that feed by and large. And then obviously everything I do here with you, always a delight to hang out and talk with you. Glad that we've got some new stuff for the Heisman Watch. We were getting a little bored talking about Matt Corral and Bryce Young. So that's fun. And then obviously, the midweek has been pretty chaotic when it comes to line moves and the moves from and our moves that we need to make from Tuesday to Friday. I hope things stay a little more quieter this week because now we at least have some football to watch in the middle of the weeks, which is nice. So yeah, at MRuss Authentic on Twitter, we get to celebrate and commiserate everything that goes down each week in the NFL, college football, NHL. We're getting close to college basketball season. Can't wait for that next Tuesday, by the way. Oh, yeah. Get fired up about that. A lot going on, and it's the best time of year.
Thanks a lot for stopping by, my dude. Appreciate it.
Happy to.
Thanks to Matt for coming on the pod. And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Like and subscribe to the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And for more from this, a brand new project titled DRF Sports. If you're not familiar with the letters DRF, well, Daily Racing Form has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we're taking over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every single game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, head-to-head records, team stats, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. But if you want access to all of the raw data, head to drf.com/sports. That's where you'll find the usual previews each and every day. Plus, we go in depth on this podcast. Basically, however you want your betting information, we've got you covered. So remember to check us out twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, here on the DRF Sports Podcast. My name is Sheldon Alexander. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.